Hi, my name's Dr. Esther Cole. I'm the founder and director of a multi-award-winning international team, Lifespan Psychology, the Diverse Practice. I'm a consultant clinical psychologist, life coach and therapy business coach, and the first Black clinical psychologist to receive the BPS Early Career Award. I run individual and group coaching sessions for therapy bosses aspiring to build their team. BOSS stands for Business Owner Support Squad. Welcome to the Breaking Through Therapy podcast. This is the only podcast that supports you to come on the show with your therapist at least 1 year later to talk about the breakthroughs that you've made along your journey and its impact on your life ever since. So this is the Mental Wellness Podcast for people interested in having talking therapy, professionals who deliver talking therapy, and everyone in between. Hello and welcome to Breaking Through Therapy. I'm so excited that we have Beth Ashley-Smith here again today, who's just been incredible. I'm sure you've all listened to her most recent episode on this podcast with her client James, who recovered from alcohol and drug addiction. Beth is a mental health nurse and psychotherapist specialising in trauma, addiction and ADHD. And I really had more questions for Beth on spirituality and how she brought that into her work. So I'm just really delighted that you come back today. And we're joined by Rob, who has so courageously and thoughtfully shared his story with us. And I think it's incredible what you've been able to share with us, what you've been through as a journalist and a war correspondent, an incredibly tough job. So grateful to you that you were doing those roles at the times we needed journalists to cover natural disasters and war and just unthinkable, horrific scenes that you were exposed to. So Rob was a journalist who covered national disasters, including the tsunami, was a war correspondent in Afghanistan 4 times, and developed PTSD in 2012 following the first of several suicide attempts. Rob then went on to develop drug and alcohol dependency, and it cost him his job and his marriage. And what's so incredible about having you here today is that you are going to help so many people understand how to recover from all of this. People who feel really dark, who feel really that there is no hope, and who've seen, atrocities and just images that they can't get out of their heads and are suffering from trauma. You found a way through that, and Beth has been there to help you. So thanks again for coming, and can't wait to hear your story and how you both work together.
That's my pleasure.
I usually start by asking, obviously as therapists and psychologists, we're trained in certain techniques, but we really want to understand if they're working, they're actually applied to real people, what we're taught at school and at university, does it actually work? Let's start from the beginning then. When did you feel that it was the right time for you to come to therapy? Or was there ever a time where you actually thought that this is going to work for me? Or actually, did you think it's not going to work?
Well, I was determined that I was strong and that, I didn't have any problems. And, I was probably the last person that you'd expect to go and speak to a therapist and open up. But it became increasingly obvious to me, and certainly to my family and everybody around me, that the level of drinking and the level of anger I was holding was out of control, basically. It got out of control over a sort of 4 or 5 year period. You mentioned 2012. I think I first saw Beth in 2019, actually. So longer than that. And I was desperate. I'd been in this downward spiral and it had just destroyed everything. And I was on a self-destruct mission where I didn't really care that I was destroying everything. From the alcohol point of view, my anger was such that the phrase "I was drinking the arsenic to try and punish everybody else" made sense of exactly where I was.
And how did you meet? And do you remember how it started, Beth, how Rob made contact with you?
I do, yeah. I used to run an addictions program and I got assessments through, and we'd meet with a client and look at their circumstances and what was best for them. And I can really strongly remember doing Rob's assessment because there was a really powerful feeling in the room and knowing I needed to take note of that.
And what was the setup? So for anybody listening today who is in that cycle of shame, self-sabotage, self-loathing, drink, feeling like there is no hope, where did you meet? So what was the program or?
Sure. So at the time I worked for a private hospital group that runs addiction programs. And what would happen is clients would ring, they'd come in for a free assessment, and we offered various packages. So it might be one-to-one therapy, it might be rehab, it might be referral onto another service. And when Rob came in, I think, we'd have that discussion with the client and sort of give our professional opinion of what worked best. Naturally, with private healthcare, you do have to consider funding and people's circumstances too. But what I remember is from the onset is that I felt that inpatient rehabilitation was suitable. And my reasons for that wasn't just about physical dependency, although that was apparent. It was the weight of fear that I felt in that room at the time, and that it could snap at any moment. And I can give you some examples. I can remember one thing that really stands out as I'm recalling it was Rob not able to have eye contact with me, was looking at exits, was very, very shifty, was not able to engage in anything meaningful about change. Just anger was there and fear. And I remember sort of really digging deep in that moment and knowing that help was really needed, but that if I didn't manage my responses in the best way I could, that I could really create a bigger problem.
What do you mean by bigger problem? Did you think, that you could lose him, was going to walk out the door? Because I know that in the notes, Rob, you'd mentioned something about that on the first night, what you went to do.
Yeah, I mean, after meeting with Beth, I ended up being offered the 4-week or 28-day alcohol dependency program in-house as an inpatient. And I remember when I arrived in a taxi on my own. I was already drunk. And then I sneaked out on the first night and bought a bottle of vodka. So the first time I met with Beth, having been assessed by her initially, I met a very different Beth. She almost threw me out and said, look, this is no good for you. I think I'm allowed to say it, but it was what I might describe as a kick up the backside.
Wow. And so that's incredible, Beth, that you felt that fear, you felt that resistance. You thought Rob could walk out at any time. How do we know as therapists the right level of boundary to put in place in that moment? But what do you think actually worked then? Because you managed to turn around a situation where Rob could have walked out, had already gone for drink on the first night, and was able to sit through a program for 28 days. Not only that, is here today engaging in a meaningful conversation about his recovery. So you have done, again, an incredible job here. And so for any therapist listening who they might be in that really kind of dark place with a client where they don't know if they can hold them, they don't know if they can make a meaningful change, they don't know if they're going to engage. What did you do to turn it around? How do you manage those boundaries?
Quite tricky. And I mean, sort of to give an overview is that with Rob, I mean, it was a lovely journey because he didn't just do the 28 days. Rob continued into aftercare. I think Rob came back for another admission when things went bad. Rob then came back and, back into aftercare. Then Rob did some one-to-one therapy with me. There was lots of elements to that journey, but going back to the first few days, I think what I called on in that moment was some of the training I've got is sort of managing. I used to teach management of violence and aggression. And I didn't feel in the assessment that Rob would be aggressive towards me, but I got a sense that there was a presence around him that was just terrifying and quite persecutory. So what I dug deep to do, and how well anyone ever does that in the moment is moment to moment, was I knew I had to demonstrate somehow I took his situation very seriously and his wishes were number one in this, not my recommendation, not what his family were telling him he should do or his employers or the law, that actually I cared about him and getting things right for him.
That brings us nicely to the next question then. What were your symptoms? Because you described some really, heavy symptoms that you were experiencing, right? Emotionally, physically.
Yeah.
You want to tell the listeners what your symptoms were? Because there is that, isn't there, Beth, that actually it's what the person's going through. That's the focus. It's not everyone else and what they want.
I think my biggest symptom was just a burning anger. I was very bitter by the way I'd been treated by my employers. I mean, for background, I covered the tsunami as a journalist and I discovered a village that had been wiped out. They were loading up bodies onto the back of pickup trucks. So I went with a photographer and followed the pickup truck to see where they'd taken the bodies. When we got there was a guy with a clipboard basically counting them in. So he knew how many bodies there were and laid out in a field. The guy told me he'd already gone through 5,000 bodies and bits of bodies, babies, I'd gazed into hell, if you like. But I was a journalist covering it. I wasn't one of the bodies lying on the ground. I wasn't one of the family members searching for their son, and I felt this feeling that this won't affect me because it's not me. It's just a story. I'm just covering this. So I think I was in a lot of denial about the impact that shock had on me. I'd never seen a dead body before. And suddenly I saw more than really most journalists would ever see in their career in one evening, So my symptoms were, I think, classic sort of PTSD symptoms, but I was in complete denial about that. So I would be really anxious, sometimes wake up with the sort of fear that I can only describe as if you woke up and saw a tiger prowling around your bedroom. So I'd often stay in bed all day. My wife at the time would bring in my 2 young children and say, look at daddy, he's pathetic. Look at him, he's given up. She was trying to do her best, but she kind of took tough love to an extreme. So again, I had anger towards her. And I think my initial barrier that I had to overcome when I went to the private hospital was the fact this is where I connected with Beth through being told off by her, because up until that point, I think I was just doing it because I was being told to do it. Whereas Beth made it clear, look, this is for you. It's your choice. You can engage with this, or frankly, you can just go, pick up your bag and go. And that was the moment, really, I think, for me, that I just decided, look, this is for me. I am in a mess. Let's just have a completely open mind, open ears, open heart, and just see what happens. So that's what I sort of consciously decided to do at the start of what would be a 28-day initial process.
That was really helpful. And just for our listeners as well, who are experiencing PTSD but maybe not knowing what post-traumatic stress disorder is. You mentioned panic attacks, you mentioned nightmares, you mentioned not being able to get out of bed. And it is so painful to hear how, somebody seeing that you're not able to get out of bed, saying that that's a weakness, but actually you can see how profoundly linked that is to your trauma.
The other symptom that was quite prevalent with me was, if you imagine somebody with road rage, we've all had that sudden feeling of the car in front, we'd kill him if we had the chance. I would find myself in that position several times a day, just in the supermarket. And that was so out of character for me. It felt like I'd become a monster that nobody cared about. And I almost played up to that sense that I'm a monster and I'm an angry person,
We have every right to be angry when you see 3,500 dead bodies and you're still living. And there's a lot of, research and people's lived experience about the guilt that they feel. Like you were saying, oh, I'm alive, so I'm okay. And you'd seen thousands of dead bodies, children, people, elderly people, and that level of suffering. And then there's a part of our brains that are hardwired to be hypervigilant and respond to threats and danger. So you're on hyper alert, like you said, ready to kill. It's really helpful to hear your experience. I think there's a lot of people, and a lot of men in particular, who may present with PTSD, but in an angry sort of form of it. That's how it's sort of presenting, and the drinking being the coping mechanism. And I think it makes a lot of sense. But without that compassion, that stigma of you're worthless, you're not doing anything, your employers are not understanding. They're not understanding the mental health component of it. Okay, let's take a pause there. Come and have a free 15-minute consultation with one of our incredible multi-award-winning practitioners at Lifespan Psychology, the Diverse Practice. We're a multicultural team of doctorate-trained psychologists, psychotherapists and counsellors offering assessment, evidence-based talking therapy, coaching, training and consultations. We now also offer ADHD assessments in person and online. We work with a range of corporate, commercial and holistic companies and accept private medical insurance, referrals from the NHS, social care and rehabilitation companies. We also offer a range of fees for self-funding clients. Contact us at info@lifespanpsychology.co.uk or www.lifespan-psychology.com and follow us on our various social media channels in the show notes. Our clients at Lifespan Psychology are our true award winners. We're here because of you, we're an award-winning team because of you, and we're inspired to be the best that we can because of you. So what would you say were your 3 most important breakthroughs in the therapy you had? I know you had the group therapy and you had the one-to-one as well. And then you had like recovery meetings as well and part of a 12-step program. So I know there's like a whole community around you in different parts. But if you had to name sort of 3 main breakthroughs, what would you say they were?
Well, I think I was very lucky because I was instantly put into a group therapy scenario with Beth and with other counsellors. And I'd adopted what I might describe as the kind of sponge predicament, where I just decided, okay, I'm going to get everything I can out of this. You know, if they tell me to stand on a chair on one leg and make monkey noises, I'll do it. Gladly, I didn't have to stand on a chair and make monkey noises. So one breakthrough for me was that, I mean, probably the biggest breakthrough was that sponge thing, that sense that, you know, this is my chance to help myself. And these people may not know what they're doing or what they're saying, and it might do nothing for me, but let's give it a go. Let's try. So secondly, I gained massively out of the group therapy scenario. When I was a kid growing up, there were a load of winos that would sit in the park and swear at us as we rode past on our BMXs. And for me, that had always been my mental picture of an alcoholic. And actually, I realized very quickly that being an alcoholic actually is a very normal, you know, you can be a high functioning alcoholic without being a tramp in a park. You know, I was surrounded by professional people, intelligent people, people whose lives had been destroyed or were being destroyed by alcohol. So I think finding kindred spirits was my breakthrough number 2. I think the third one for me was just finding a degree of humility, I suppose, where rather than fight it, I felt like my fists were clenched almost. And it was a case of just letting those white knuckles fade and just, I felt really loved inside the hospital. I felt really valued in part of the group. And I hadn't had that feeling for so many years. Actually, the 28 days changed my life for certain.
That is so incredible. How do you feel listening to that, Beth? And did you notice any other breakthroughs?
I mean, I feel close to tears, actually. It's really moving to hear it back and remember that, because it was a powerful journey, but over a long period, and there were lots of powerful points. I think something that really stands out, actually, 2 things. One being is that, look, both me and Rob have noted anger was a huge piece of this. I love working with anger, overt anger, because you can do something with it, you can connect with it. I struggle more when it's not there. So that for me was always like, you know, like quids in, I'm going to enjoy this working with this client, because it was just there. It's in the room. You can do something. So that was lovely. But what also came with that was a really deep compassion that ran parallel, that played out with the care that Rob was showing to other clients in the group, even, you know, to staff members. There was a willingness to apologize when, you know, there'd been uncontainable rage. So that really stood out. The other thing that sort of goes hand in hand with that, I mean, I could give sort of 5 to 10 examples, but the other one, because we've noted it, was about community. And I remember Rob really struggling with the 12-step fellowship concept. And I do remember some sulking about it and sort of a reluctance to go and, you know, tuts. But brought a really pertinent question. And the discussion we had around it, I use routinely with clients now, you know, ever since that moment. And it was something that really demonstrated Rob's compassion and sadness, and I guess fear of own circumstances. And he'd been to a meeting with his peers, and somebody in there had shared they were suicidal, and it had moved Rob, and he'd connected with it. And his anger in group and his diary the next morning was, why didn't anybody step in to help? That's not fair. What is this rubbish? You know, so-called people that want to help. But it opens a really nice discussion. And for me, that is absolutely the power of the 12-step group, is that you can say that and be witnessed, and it's enough. You're not going to have to stifle everyone's emotions and fear around you because you've scared them. You're not going to have people telling you to do it or not do it, or you should do this. You can just say it and dilute it. And the coin drop in the room in that group was really powerful for me. And it's something that I'm able to use again and again and again. It was a lovely moment.
Just for our listeners, and just to clarify that a little bit more, what did you mean, Rob? Did you mean it was falling on deaf ears, that no one was really listening to the person in your group who was being suicidal? What was it that you wanted to happen?
Well, I'm not really very sure. I mean, I think I was ignorant of how meetings on the 12 steps worked. You don't all give each other therapy and your own two pence worth, when somebody says something and it's not then an open discussion. I think that's actually frowned upon. I think it's about sharing, but listening, not necessarily reacting. And I can see why that's so important, actually, now, having been in many a meeting. I think some people will share things in the moment, and they probably wouldn't do if they thought the rest of the room was then going to try and self-analyze them. And that kind of taught me that's actually what it's about. It's not about people coming in there because they need help from everyone around them. You all help each other by listening to each other. It's slightly different.
That's so powerful. It's kind of like the acceptance of the knowing that there's a safe space that you can bring up what you need to without fear of being judged or someone interjecting or someone. It's companionship and a shared journey walking alongside each other, but it's not necessary that you all going to talk in detail and in depth about each other's experiences in that group. But we talked about you feeling suicidal and multiple suicide attempts. So how did you work with Beth with that? Because that sounds, well, obviously extremely frightening. And how is that managed in this setting?
Well, in 2012, I was told I was being suspended from work. I got very drunk. I came home and we had a sort of barn outbuilding in my house. When I got home, I went in that barn, poured the petrol from a petrol can over my head and over my body. And my wife actually had heard me, thank goodness, I suppose, and followed me in and stopped me. I don't know whether I would have lit the cigarette lighter I had in my pocket or not. I'll never know that. What I do know is if I had, I would have been dead, and it would have been a horrifically painful death. So suicide was a very real and present threat for me, because if I was carrying that much anger, the potential of turning that anger on myself, I knew I could hate myself that much that I could make a temporary decision which would be permanent. One of the big challenges I had was the 12 steps is a spiritual program. And by step 3, or step 2, really, you're accepting that you can't cope on your own. You need a help from a higher power, whatever that might be. That was a problem for me because I'd obviously, to get into the state that I was in, I'd built up resentments. And I was brought up in a Christian family. My mum was a Christian writer. And I think, unfortunately, looking back, staring and smelling and tasting all that death around me in the tsunami made me think almost subconsciously, I was brought up believing God is kind, God is love, God is all those things. So I was very scared off. And one of my resentments was towards Christianity in particular. So where the mention of God is in the 3rd step, that was a real potential barrier for me, because that angry me comes out,
Again, very common to have feelings of suicidality with PTSD. And so how did you bring spirituality in, Beth, into that 3rd step? Because this is really, really powerful. Somebody who has lost their faith, they've been exposed to such horrific, loss of life, and they don't believe that there is a, all-loving God. And then at that point, you tell them to turn over to higher power. How does that work?
Gosh, where do we start and begin with that? Where do we start and begin? But what I will say is that having worked with addictions for about 20 years, more so than anything else I work with, it's so usual that people will bring something like that from their childhood, regardless of faith, whether it's Christian, Hindu, Muslim, the list goes on, Buddhist. There's something that really hurts about that and feels unsafe. That's a really normal experience in these rooms. And I don't know why, maybe the answer's in it, and the 12-step program will call it a spiritual disease. I'm inclined to believe that. So to share a bit about Rob's journey is a couple of bits that really stood out in regards to spirituality was, and this is something, Rob, you mentioned it yourself, but I really loved about this journey is you did just lend yourself to anything that we asked. And even things that I know probably deep down you felt was stupid, you did it. One being art therapy. And I think we had to draw an emotion. I think that might have been the task in that particular group that I used to pluck it out, whatever felt relevant. But that one, I think we drew an emotion. And I remember Rob drawing anger, and it was a church or a graveyard or something along those lines, and just saying, I hate God, or something like that written across the top. But what was particularly powerful with that group was there was a lady who had a very strong Christian faith in the same group. which was a really useful dynamic to have and interesting and developed really quickly. But coming back to the question, how do you bring it into group? I think there's different bits of looking at spirituality, and we used to do a lecture on it, because all spirituality really means is connection. Okay, so you can look at it in various ways, but that's the crux of it. It's a spiritual disease addiction. We just become disconnected with everyone and ourselves. So it's about healing that, forgetting all the sort of physical stuff and all the other bits and pieces that go with it. It's kind of fundamental. But the word God can be frightening. So some of the bits that we'd look at with that is looking at what religion means and what faith means, and looking at them as different components, whatever your core value set is. Religions is a kind of a law, it's a list. It's maybe the Bible, maybe the Quran, maybe the Torah. It doesn't really matter. It's how we live our lives sort of factually, what we need to do to sort of be able to lend ourselves. Faith, on the other hand, is about belief, hope, where we put our thoughts. That's a different concept, and that's not actually tied to any religion. It's just we have a belief in something. So the 12 steps were in 1939, and they haven't changed for a reason. But I'm really aware if I send someone to a meeting that is far away or got resentments to this, that what I need to think about is how the language is used. Higher power or 12 steps or prayers makes people want to run a mile. It's like, what is this? Is it a cult? It's something I hear really regularly. And I think God can be any number of things. So whether it's a God of your faith group, whether it's Jesus Christ, whether it's Muhammad, whether it's Allah, that's one way of looking at it. But God can just mean what rules your life. And if you're walking into a 12-step group, alcohol or drugs or sex or gambling has become your God, because it's where you put all of your hope and faith. It's what's leading you. It's what motivates you to get up in the morning. So that's kind of where I come from. And it really doesn't matter if your God is the sun rising every day is more powerful than you. You cannot change that. You don't have control over it. It doesn't matter whether it's using an acronym, good orderly direction, or another group of drunks as another acronym used. It's bigger than you, and you can put your faith in it in the same way that you've been choosing to put it into a substance or behaviour.
Really, really powerful, Beth. What did you take from it, Rob, in terms of your spirituality and how things turned around for you in your faith? Because obviously at that point you'd lost faith.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't really lost my faith. I decided that if there is a God, I don't like him. So I had a faith. Being a journalist, it is about people, and I do love people. I'm fascinated by anyone that I meet, whoever they are. And I think because I adopted the sponge position, I was just going to have to dig deep and accept that, okay, God might be part of this recovery. As Beth said, it might be a group of drunks, meaning God. But whatever it was, there was something so powerful in the room, in the group sessions, that seemed bigger than us, putting us all together into a group. There weren't masses of us. There's only a handful of people, maybe 6 or 7. But there was something very special, and I started to really look forward to the morning sessions and the afternoon sessions, and that kind of softened my heart, I guess. It wasn't the end of a journey. I didn't come out of the hospital at the end of 28 weeks absolutely fine, done and dusted. Thank you very much, I'll get on with my life now. It was actually the start of a very long journey that I'm still on. But I've been baptized since then. I go to church. I've met some incredible people that live in faith. And I'd like to think that's a central part of my life, not just something that I needed when I was at my absolute rock bottom. It's something I realized God was always with me, not against me. And coming to terms with the fact that I can't quantify why 5,000 people die in one town, one village. It's not for me. It's not for humans to try and attach a rational explanation for that. So I was able to let go of that. And I think that was a breakthrough moment for me. But it didn't happen until quite a long time after the initial first steps of that were made in the group therapy sessions.
Okay, that's food for thought. Let's take a break here. I personally believe that health is the most important form of wealth, and it should be free at the point of need for everyone on the planet. We're therefore fundraising for NHS Charities Together and hoping to raise £10,000 per year through this podcast. NHS Charities Together currently fund over 4,000 projects to support staff and patients to build a brighter future for the NHS. Find out more from our fundraising page in the show notes. This podcast is free to listen to, but we recommend a one-off donation of the cost of your therapy session or anything you can afford so we can reach our £10,000 target every year to support the NHS. I've donated the price of my therapy session, and my company will continue to sponsor this podcast and fundraise for the NHS as long as we're able to. Please rate, like, share and subscribe to this podcast to spread the word. If you would like to sponsor us or feature on the show, please email info@breakingthroughtherapy.com. Beth, I love the way you kind of translated or decoded the 1939 steps into language that would be more accessible for people to understand that spirituality and faith is about connection. It's about having values. Rob, you feeling connected to everybody in that room, that you were together on some sort of journey that was particularly powerful, meaningful in each other's lives. And that's the point in which you start, isn't it? That it's connection with others and it doesn't necessarily have to be formal religion. I think that's really, really powerful. So thank you.
I had a very strong sense as well that once you've had your eyes slightly open to the 12 steps, and especially steps 1 to 3, then you're never going to be the same again as someone who's used alcohol as a medicine, as a friend, as a motivation, because you actually know, look, this actually is an issue. It's a problem. You're in denial if you think you're in control of it. So for me, that was a really important aspect of it. Starting the 12 steps. Once you've done that, you might carry on drinking or taking drugs for years to come, but you'll always know in the back of your mind that there's a problem there and it's a problem that can be solved.
And you make a really, really important point. Addictions are sort of the most relapsing condition, aren't they, that we can treat? You're most likely to go back to drink or drugs. So what helps keep people sober? Like, what does recovery look like? Is it like a daily or minutely or hourly practice that, we need if we fall into addiction? What does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, it is a daily thing. When I wake up in the mornings, I pray that I have a sober day and I ask God for his help with that. I don't tend to get cravings, but if I get cravings, then I pray. But the most special thing for me is going to bed in the evenings and thanking God for a sober day and thanking God for one or two good things that happened that day. I don't know whether I'll wake up tomorrow and I'll blow it and I'll start drinking. I don't know. But I can get through what time of day it is now. It's coming up to, halfway through the day, and so far so good, because it's such a dangerous drug, alcohol. You turn on the television and it's there. We celebrate with alcohol. We commiserate with alcohol. It's so intertwined into our lives that it is a battle. 20 minutes from now, I can have a 1.5 litre bottle sat here on the desk next to me by doing Uber Eats. 20 minutes, 24 hours a day. It's very, very difficult to break that cycle.
That's really helpful. And Beth, same question to you. So how do we stay in recovery? Such a high power as alcohol and drugs, so accessible, so seductive, so powerful.
I don't think there's one answer to that. I mean, there's some things that can be useful for all, but it really is an individual journey. But I think a couple of things is whether it's 12 steps or whether it's something else, community is so important, and who you surround yourself with can be really lonely at first because, we've learned how to disconnect. So it's learning to connect again. That's something that's really important. I think being mindful, the other one, I mean, they say it in lots of places, but people, places and pastimes. So thinking about where you're going. I mean, some people, I've got no problem sitting in a pub. It doesn't bother me, but I know some people will relapse as soon as they go in there. Things like that. Or is there certain friends or certain, celebrations where you're just going to relapse? Thinking about how to navigate those. Where possible, get some long-term support, therapy. I mean, Rob's described a lovely journey, and it's sort of meeting your needs where you're at. So if you relapse, if you feel suicidal again, as you get the intensive support again, and sort of letting go of any shame with that, because it's not a straight line recovery. The thing that intrigues me as well, and it's something that comes up a lot with clients that I work with, but really profound listening to Rob today, is a lot of the things that I hear Rob talking about now, 5 years, 6 years in, aren't things he was talking about when he came into rehab. The tsunami wasn't mentioned. There were other really huge things around Rob in his life that were really troubling and distressing. but that wasn't one that was mentioned. And I really want to give people hope with that, because for those who want to learn more about trauma, Bessel van der Kolk, let's do a plug for him here, because he teaches us a lot about how the body responds. And I actually believe, listening to Rob today, he wasn't able to work through that, coming out of physical dependency, feeling suicidal. His body was kind to him. It kept it safe until he got stable enough to be able to think, right, now I tackle it. Some years on from that initial point, that's quite normal. I think for me trauma goes hand in hand with addiction in the main. All of us arguably have some trauma. But I think early days, even in, first few years of recovery, is about grounding and just learning how to look after our emotions, learning how to bring our body sort of responses down. And, because I tell you what, my husband or partner can say, oh, you didn't shut the dishwasher. I could go through the roof at that on the wrong day. Why the hell did you say that? Don't you know I've been busy all day? Well, if I can't manage that in the moment and I'm wanting to troll through really painful life experiences that I've had to artificially shut down. So it's learning the small things, going to the gym, can I sleep well? Can I eat a nice diet? Do I need some help with that? Have I got activities just to calm me down in the moment? Those things are so profoundly important, and arguably more important than addressing the trauma early days. We can always do that, in a safer time.
And was that quite obvious to you, Rob, as well, working with Beth, what your triggers were?
Yeah, I mean, that was a key part. When you asked me earlier what 3 things, I should have also mentioned the most important thing was learning my triggers. What was it? I mean, at the time I was going through a very toxic relationship with my other half, and I wanted to be a great dad. And of course, you can't be a great dad if you're a drunk. You just can't. You might think you're a great dad, but you're not aware of your children looking at you when you're asleep on the sofa at 6 o'clock in the evening. You think you've done nothing wrong, but you have, So I had to learn what triggered me. That was important. But I also think going into the hospital and doing the course was the beginning of almost as if I was trying to learn a trade. And when you learn a trade, you then qualify and you work as a tradesman, but you're always looking to embrace new bits of technology, new tools, things that would help you. Just so if, like a carpenter might decide, right, I'm going to invest in this new wonderful thing that halves the time it takes me to do whatever. And that still, when we talk about it as a daily journey, I'm still looking for those things. I've found great help in being connected to, I've done a couple of recovery courses. After them, you're on a WhatsApp group and people share, and you see most incredible transformations in people, but you also see them reaching out in SOS, and then the group kind of comes together to try and do whatever they can to help. That's a fantastic tool. And yeah, when I walked in drunk to the hospital, I was a very isolated, lonely person. And I simply don't feel like that anymore. I know I've got a support network, that people I can ring, people that actually care about me, and people that know they can ring me and I can actually give something to them. That's where you want to get to when you've become an isolated, angry, antisocial, broken person.
And that's an amazing point, because most of the time people have gone through so much and so traumatized, the last thing they want to do is talk to anyone or be close to anyone or trust anyone, or the people close to them they can't trust anymore. So it is about redefining your community and realigning yourself with people with the same values. And it might involve not being close to the people you used to be, but it makes so much sense, doesn't it? Just kind of that growth and evolution from your circumstance.
Yeah, I mean, it was hard when I came out of the hospital, because all of my friends, I realized drink was central. I went to a barbecue. Actually, it was just a drinking session. If I went to the pub and spent some time with them to watch a football match, actually, it was my chance to have a drink. And so I did actually have to isolate myself a bit to get stronger, But now the rewards of not being in a constant state of anger and having worked through my PTSD through extra one-to-one therapy, I just would dread to put the clock back to those days. And I think that's where you want to channel your fear. And that's why group sessions work, because there'll be somebody walk in the door who's in that dark place that you were in. And it reminds you and it teaches you and it refreshes you. I learn more from the person that walks in the room for the first time than the person that's been sober for 30 years and is sharing their story.
That's really powerful. And thank you both. There's probably just time for one more quick question. What was it like working across gender? So I know a lot of clients do prefer female therapists and male clients as well. But how did that work for you both? And I'll ask Beth first.
It didn't even really come into the question. It's not something that felt as strong in this situation. Sometimes it does, but it didn't on this one. But, you know, and this isn't answering your question, but I mean, it's something that always stands out. It felt like some parenting hurt, a mother hurt, is that one of the things that Rob mentioned in earlier memory, at least on 3 or 4 occasions, and I think it goes right back to what worked in the first instance, is sharing his sadness at having a T-shirt as a child that said, "Here comes trouble," and feeling that label attached to him really stands out. And look, I didn't know that until later in the journey. Funnily enough, I've got a friend who's an author that's written a book about her recovery with a similar story in about a T-shirt that was very similar, how it left her feeling. But for me, I think that combined with the older lady in the group, I was very, very mindful of mother wound and not hurting it further. So that was really in the forefront for me. And I think, you know what, learning that later down the track is, it makes complete sense to me, especially for every client, that one of the bases of the trauma was being misunderstood and not heard, which makes complete sense of why it was so important early days to listen to what his needs were, not what everyone was telling him his needs should be.
That's so powerful. For anyone listening who doesn't understand the mother hurt, I suppose it's the maternal instincts that we get when we're somebody's therapist. I think that's what you mean, isn't it? There's almost like reparenting that goes on in therapy at times, and you can take the position of being a mother and nurturing and kind of, yeah, what you wanted to do is understand what his needs were as a child and how he might have been hurt or misunderstood. So that was really lovely. Thank you for sharing that. And for you, Rob, what was it like having a female therapist? I think you said you'd prefer not to have a male therapist.
Yeah, it wasn't something that I'd even really thought about because I was in such a bad state. I wouldn't have said, well, hang on a minute, I don't want a woman. I'd like to have a male. My consultant was a male, and I think I responded better with Beth than with him. I hope he doesn't listen to this podcast.
I'm going to send it to him.
Don't.
No, I won't.
I've got 3 sisters and 2 daughters, for what it's worth. But for me, Beth was almost like a big sister, almost.
Aww, so nice.
I hope that's okay to say. But yeah.
It's just very helpful because I think these dynamics are happening. I think it's for people who are really wary of going to therapy or don't know what therapy is about. It's just kind of demystifying it for them that, you know, we are ordinary people, that we do have feelings, and these are relationships that are kind of happening subconsciously. But the most important thing is your recovery and the work we're doing to support you achieve the goals that you want to live a more fulfilling life. But it's always helpful, I think, to understand those dynamics. So Beth, if anyone wanted to work with you, which I'm sure you'll have tons of people wanting to work with you after podcast number 2 with you, how would they get hold of you?
Sure. Wow. I mean, my website is www.bethanashley-smith.co.uk, and there's an inquiry form. I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, and I welcome inquiries. And if I can't work with you, I've got a couple of close colleagues who work very similar to me. I do some family work with another colleague where we work with people on both sides of the coin of addiction together. Please reach out.
Brilliant. And was there anything else you wanted to say before we finish today?
I'm just really, really thankful to have the opportunity to do this. And I think, you know, spirituality is a frightening word for many with good reason. You know, try and keep it brief. But one of the bits of studying I've done this year is around the inner child model, specifically to sex addiction, but it fits any addiction. And it pays a lot of attention to spiritual wounding in children, which it doesn't really matter, as was explained earlier. Let's forget the religious title of what spirituality is. I think God words or religious words can be used as weapons to children, and sometimes with the best will in the world, but it's something that can leave us in adulthood very, very frightened and put a wall up that can be really dangerous. So I urge people not to be frightened and to explore what spirituality means to them.
Oh, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And do send me some links I can put in the show notes about all of those resources in your friend's book and so on. And thank you so much, Rob, for being here today. This podcast is not a replacement for professional, psychological or psychiatric help. You can book an appointment with our team on info@lifespanpsychology.co.uk, but we do not provide a crisis service. If you've been affected by any of the content and need to speak to somebody urgently, please contact your GP to make a referral for talking therapies. You can contact NHS 111 out of hours or the Samaritans on 116 123. Childline also offer a free confidential helpline for children and young people in distress and offer support from counsellors online. Call 0800 1111 or go to www.childline.org.uk. If you're worried about someone's safety, please call 999 and bring them to the Accident and Emergency Service. You can contact the charity CALM, Campaign Against Living Miserably, or NSPCC for Children. These resources are in the show notes. Thank you for being part of the Breaking Through Therapy community. I would also like to thank the composer of this theme tune. It's called Bliss by Luke Bergs. Let's dive into more conversations that change the courses of people's lives in upcoming episodes.